Commander Kung Ho pressed his clawed hand against the cold metal of the observation deck, watching the blue marble spinning slowly beneath his fleet. Earth looked so small from up here, so fragile. The swirling white clouds reminded him of his home world before the hegemony had stripped it bare for resources. That was a lifetime ago, before he became one of their most trusted commanders. The bridge hummed with activity as dozens of alien crew members prepared for what they all believed would be another routine conquest. The hegemony had perfected the art of planetary subjugation over centuries. Show overwhelming force, destroy key military targets, and the native species would surrender within days. It had worked on Kepler 4-4 to be with the insectoid Thrakari. It had worked on Wolf 359c with the aquatic Zephyrians. It would work here too. Lieutenant Wu Jin's boots clicked against the metal floor as he approached, his reptilian features serious as always. In his four-fingered grip, he carried a data pad glowing with intelligence reports gathered from months of covert observation. Commander, our scouts have completed their analysis, Wu Jin said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had seen this same briefing dozens of times. The dominant species calls themselves humans. Bipedal mammals. Average height, 1.7 meters. Primitive brain development. They fight with chemical propellant weapons that fire small metal projectiles. Kyung Ho took the datapad and scrolled through images of human military equipment. Crude tanks that moved on metal tracks. Aircraft that relied on combustion engines. Instead of plasma drives, soldiers carrying weapons that looked like they belonged in a museum compared to hegemony pulse rifles. No energy weapons at all? Kung Ho asked, though he already knew the answer. None, sir. No particle shields, no quantum communications, no antimatter cores. Their most advanced vessels barely leave their own atmosphere. Intelligence estimates they are at least 500 years behind us technologically. Through the massive viewing, Port Kun Cho could see the rest of his fleet taking positions. 12 heavy cruisers, each one capable of cracking a moon in half. 48 assault ships loaded with battle mechs and atmospheric fighters. 200,000 of the galaxy's most experienced soldiers, armed with weapons that could disintegrate. Matter at the molecular level, against this overwhelming force, stood a species that still used gunpowder. Kyun-Ho had been fighting the hegemony's wars for 30 years. Ever since they had conquered his own people and offered him a choice between death and service, he had chosen service, and over the decades, he had become very good at it. 17 worlds had fallen under his command. 17 civilizations had learned to kneel before the hegemony's might. Sir, Communications Officer Hei-1 called from her station. We're receiving multiple transmissions from the planet's surface. Various languages, but our translators are picking up common phrases. What kind of phrases? Kyun-Ho asked, though he was only half listening. He was mentally reviewing the invasion plan, calculating the most efficient way to break human resistance. Words like "come and take it," and "remember the Alamo," and "we shall never surrender." The transmissions seemed to be rallying calls. Kung Ho's attention sharpened. Most species, when faced with obviously superior firepower, immediately began broadcasting surrender offers or pleas for mercy. These humans seemed to be doing the opposite. Perhaps they don't understand what they're facing, Wu Jin suggested. Once they see our weapons in action, they'll realize resistance is futile. From his position on the bridge, Kyung-Ho could see the lights of human cities twinkling on the dark side of the planet. Each point of light represented thousands of lives, families, going about their evening routines, completely unaware that their world was about to change forever. He had seen this same view from orbit above 17 other worlds. Usually it made him feel nothing at all. Tonight something felt different. Deploy the first wave, Kung Ho ordered, pushing the strange feeling aside. Target military installations and government centers. Standard intimidation protocol. Once they see what we can do, they'll surrender like all the others. The massive ships of his fleet began their descent, their hulls glowing red as they entered Earth's atmosphere. From the surface, they would look like falling stars, like harbingers of doom dropping from the heavens. Kyung Ho had seen the effect countless times. Populations would panic, governments would collapse, and within hours, white flags would appear. But as the first ships broke through the cloud layer, something unexpected happened. Instead of panic, instead of chaos, the humans began to organize. Military bases activated their defenses, futile as they were. Cities turned on every light they had, as if daring the aliens to come closer. Radio transmissions filled the airwaves with music, messages of hope, and promises to fight until the very end. In New York, Los Angeles, London, Tokyo, and Moscow, humans stood on rooftops and balconies, looking up at the alien fleet with expressions that Kyung-ho would spend the rest of his life trying to understand. There was fear in their eyes, yes, but there was something else too. Something that looked almost like excitement. Something that looked like they had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. The tactical hologram flickered in the dim light of the command bridge, showing a three-dimensional map of Earth. Covered in angry red dots, each dot represented a battle zone, and there were far too many of them. Kyung-ho stared at the display, his scaled fingers gripping the edge of the console until his knuckles turned white. 3 days. In 3 days, 17 worlds had fallen to his forces. But Earth was different. Earth was wrong. "Sir, we've lost another mech unit in downtown Chicago," reported Captain Minho, his voice tight with disbelief. "The humans. They turned the subway tunnels into a maze of traps. Our heavy armor can't maneuver underground, and they're picking us apart with small arms fire." Kyung-ho pulled up the combat footage from the fallen mechs. The 20-foot-tall war machines had been designed to crush any resistance, their plasma, cannons capable of melting through solid steel. But in the cramped confines of human-built tunnels, they became sitting targets. Groups of humans with nothing but crude explosive devices and metal projectile weapons swarmed the mechs like insects, crawling up their legs and detonating charges at weak points. "How are they even coordinating?" Woojin asked, studying his own tactical display. "We've destroyed their military command centers, taken out their communication satellites. They should be fighting blind." The answer came from an unexpected source. Private Dong-soo, one of their communications specialists, looked up from his station with wide eyes. "Sir, they're using something called social media, civilian networks we didn't even know existed. They're sharing battle plans, coordinating attacks, and—" He paused, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "They're broadcasting everything live." Kyung-ho moved to the communications station and watched the small screen showing human transmissions. A young human male, barely out of adolescence, was speaking into a small device, while explosions echoed in the background behind him. "This is Jake from Brooklyn," the human was saying, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "The aliens just took the Manhattan Bridge, but we made them pay for every inch. Remember? Aim for the joints in their armor. Their shields don't cover everything." The transmission cut to another human, an elderly female, in what appeared to be a kitchen. "This is Martha from Kansas. If you're making those bottle explosives, add some of that fertilizer from the garden center. Trust me, it works." More transmissions followed. A child no older than 12, explaining how to jam alien communication frequencies using modified radio equipment. A group of humans in military uniforms showing others how to turn everyday vehicles into mobile weapons platforms. "They're learning," Hae-won said quietly. "Every tactic we use against them, they adapt and share with others across the planet in real time." The tactical display updated with new casualty reports. In London, a group of humans had somehow hijacked one of their atmospheric fighters and crashed it into a hegemony command post. In Tokyo, civilians were using mirrors and polished metal to redirect their own energy weapons back at them. In Moscow, humans had figured out how to hack their battle drones and turn them against their own forces. Sir Minho's voice was strained. "Ground Commander Taesong is requesting immediate reinforcements in Los Angeles. He says the humans have stopped retreating entirely. They're charging our positions." Kyung-ho switched to the live feed from Los Angeles. What he saw defied everything he knew about warfare. Human soldiers, vastly outgunned and outnumbered, were advancing directly into hegemony fire lines. Not because they thought they could win, but because they were buying time for civilians to escape. He watched a human female soldier throw herself on top of a pulse grenade to save her squad mates. Watched a group of human males hold a bridge against impossible odds so that a column of refugees could cross to safety. Watched humans with primitive medical equipment rushing into active combat zones to rescue the wounded, both human and alien. Commander Hay-1 called urgently, "You need to hear this transmission from New York." The audio crackled to life, filled with static and the sound of distant explosions. But through it all, Kyun-ho could hear something that made his blood run cold. The humans were singing. It wasn't a song of surrender or mourning. It was defiant. Triumphant even. Hundreds of voices joined together in harmony, the melody carrying across the ruined cityscape like a battle cry. The words were in a language called English, but somehow Kyun-ho understood their meaning without translation. They were singing about freedom, about never giving up, about fighting until their last breath. On the main display, orbital cameras showed the battle for Times Square. A small group of human defenders had barricaded themselves in a damaged building, surrounded by hegemony forces. They were clearly outnumbered, clearly outgunned, clearly going to die, but they kept fighting. Kyung-ho watched as a human female cradled a wounded male in her arms, while continuing to fire her primitive rifle at his soldiers. She was crying. But she didn't stop shooting, even when a plasma bolt found its mark and she began to fall. Her finger never left the trigger. She died still fighting, still protecting the male in her arms, still singing that same defiant song. Something twisted in Kyung-ho's chest, a sensation he hadn't felt in decades. His own people had surrendered quickly when the hegemony came. They had chosen survival over resistance, life over death. He had made the same choice, serving as conquerors rather than dying for his freedom. But these humans, they were choosing something else entirely. Sir Woojin said quietly, "What are your orders?" Kyung-ho stared at the tactical display, at the spreading red markers that showed a war unlike any he had ever fought. His forces still held the advantage, would eventually win through sheer attrition, but for the first time in 30 years of service, Commander Kyung-ho of the hegemony wasn't sure that victory would feel like winning. The transport skimmer glided silently through the rubble-strewn streets of what had once been New York City. Kyun-ho stared out through the armored glass at the skeletal remains of skyscrapers, their twisted metal frames reaching toward a gray sky like the bones of some massive creature. The acrid smell of smoke and melted plastic leaked through the vehicle's air filters, constant reminder of what his victory had cost. Captain Minho sat across from him, reviewing casualty reports on his datapad. The numbers told a story that the hegemony high command would not want to hear. 40% losses among ground forces, 60% among mech units, equipment damage that would take years to replace. And for what? Single primitive world that should have fallen in days. The final resistance pocket in Central Park was eliminated this morning, Minho reported, his voice flat and mechanical. No survivors. Kyung-ho nodded but said nothing. He remembered Central Park from the orbital surveys before the invasion. It had been green then, filled with trees and walking paths where humans had brought their young to play. Now it was a crater of melted glass and twisted metal, the final resting place of 200 human fighters who had held out for 3 weeks against impossible odds. They had been children. Most of them. Teenagers who should have been in schools instead of foxholes, but they had fought like veterans, using every tree, every rock, every piece of debris as cover. When his forces finally overran their positions, they found messages scratched into the walls of their makeshift bunkers. Not cries for help or pleas for mercy, but jokes and drawings and promises to meet again in whatever afterlife humans believed in. The skimmer turned a corner and passed one of the temporary detention centers, through the chain-link fencing topped. With energy barriers, Kyung-ho could see hundreds of human survivors. They should have been broken, defeated, ready to accept their new reality as subjects of the hegemony. Instead, they had organized themselves into something that looked almost like a small city. Groups of humans tended to the wounded, using improvised medical supplies. Others taught children to read and write in the dirt with sticks. Someone had even managed to create a small garden in one corner of the compound, growing vegetables from seeds they had smuggled in somehow. "Stop the vehicle," Kung-ho ordered. Minho looked surprised but relayed the command to their driver, Skimmer. Settled to the ground near the main gate of the detention center, and Kyung-ho stepped out into the harsh afternoon sun. The sound of human voices drifted across the compound, and he was startled to realize they were singing again. Not the defiant battle songs he had heard during the fighting, but something softer. Something that sounded like a lullaby. He walked closer to the fence and saw a human female sitting cross-legged on the ground, holding a small child in her arms. The woman was thin, her clothes torn and dirty, but her voice was clear and strong as she sang. Other humans sat in a circle around her, adding their voices to hers. "That's Lisa Park," said Lieutenant Hae-won, who had joined them from the guard post. "She was a teacher before the invasion. The child isn't hers. His parents were killed in the fighting, so she's been caring for him." Kyung-ho watched as Lisa finished her song and gently laid the sleeping child on a makeshift bed. "Oh," she noticed his presence at the fence and stood up, walking over to face him directly. There was no fear in her eyes, no hatred, just a quiet dignity that made him feel suddenly ashamed of his uniform. "You're the commander," she said. "It wasn't a question. I am. The guards say you're planning to move us to work camps on other worlds, separate the families." Kyung-ho had read the orders that morning. Standard protocol for conquered populations. Break up family units, distribute them across different systems to prevent organized resistance. It was efficient and had worked on 17 other worlds. "Those are the orders," he said quietly. Lisa nodded as if she had expected this answer. "The children won't understand. They've lost so much already." She paused, looking back at the sleeping boy. "Will you let me stay with him? His nightmares. I'm the only one who can calm him down." Something twisted in Kyung-ho's chest. It's the same cold feeling he had experienced watching humans die while still fighting. This woman was facing the destruction of everything she had ever known, and her concern was for an orphan child who wasn't even related to her. Sir Sergeant Dong Hain approached nervously. "We need to discuss the duty assignments for tomorrow." They walked back to the command post, a converted human building that still smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Dong Hyeon closed the door and turned to face his commander with troubled eyes. "Sir, we're having problems with morale among the troops. Many of the soldiers are requesting transfers off-world. Some are questioning orders." "What kind of orders?" "The execution list, sir. High Command wants us to eliminate anyone who showed leadership during the resistance. Teachers, doctors, community organizers. The troops are refusing to carry them out." Kyung-ho wasn't surprised. He had seen the change in his soldiers over the past months. They had come to Earth expecting to fight primitive warriors with crude weapons. Instead, they had encountered something they didn't understand. Humans who died protecting strangers. Humans who shared their last piece of food with children. Humans who sang lullabies in concentration camps. It was changing them, making them ask questions they had never asked before. "How many refusals?" Kyung-ho asked. 17 cases yesterday, 23 today, and sir, Dong hesitated. 3 of our best squad leaders disappeared last night. They left their weapons and equipment behind. Desertion was a capital offense in the hegemony military. But Kyung-ho found he couldn't work up any anger toward the missing soldiers. He understood why they had left. He understood because he was beginning to feel the same way. That evening, as he reviewed the latest reports from High Command, Kyung-ho thought about the human female named Lisa and the child she was protecting. Tomorrow, according to his orders, they would be separated forever. The boy would be sent to a labor camp on Kepler 438b, where he would spend his life mining rare earth elements. Lisa would go to a different system entirely, probably to an agricultural world where former teachers worked in the fields until they died. It was efficient. It was practical. It was exactly what the hegemony had done to his own people 30 years ago. But for the first time since putting on his uniform, Commander Kyung-ho wondered if efficient and practical were the same thing as right. Outside his window, he could hear the humans in the detention center singing their lullabies again. The sound carried across the ruined city, like a promise that something could survive even the worst darkness, something that his own people had lost long ago. But that these stubborn, impossible humans refused to give up, the quantum encrypted. Message arrived at 0347 hours, marked with security codes that Kung Ho had only seen twice in his 30-year career. His hands trembled slightly as he decoded the transmission in the privacy of his command quarters. The soft hum of the ship's engines, the only sound in the darkness. What he read made his blood turn to ice. The message wasn't from the hegemony. Military command. It was from the inner circle, the shadowy group that controlled the empire from behind the scenes. And it contained orders that shattered everything Kung Ho thought he knew. About his mission, he read the document 3 times, each word burning into his memory like acid. Then he sat in the darkness for an hour, staring at the wall while his entire worldview crumbled around him. At dawn, he called an emergency meeting of his senior staff. Captain Minho, Lieutenant Hei-Wan, Sergeant Dong Haiyan, and the other officers who had survived the brutal campaign gathered in the briefing room. They looked tired, haunted by months of fighting an enemy that refused to break. What I'm about to tell you, Kunjo began, his voice barely above a whisper, changes everything we thought we knew about this war. He activated the holographic display and showed them the classified files he had received. Star charts marked with red zones, lists of species that had been completely eliminated, records of atmospheric poisoning, planetary bombardment, and systematic genocide carried out by hegemony forces across the galaxy. Earth was never meant to be conquered, he said, watching the horror dawn on their faces. The hegemony doesn't want human slaves or human territory. They want humans dead. All of them. Lieutenant Hei-Wan's face went pale. Sir, that's impossible. The hegemony's mission is to bring order to the galaxy, to unite all species under one government. That's what they tell us, Kyung-ho replied. But look at the real data, species classification reports, psychological profiles. Any race that shows too much independent thinking, too much willingness to fight for freedom, gets marked for elimination. He pulled up another file, showing the atmospheric deployment schedule. Massive chemical processing ships were already en route to Earth's orbit. In 72 hours, they would begin releasing toxins into the planet's atmosphere. Every human on Earth would be dead within a week. They want us to evacuate all hegemony personnel, Kyung-ho continued. Then they'll poison the air itself. Make it look like the humans did it to themselves with their primitive industry. Sergeant Dong Han stared at the deployment schedules in disbelief. How many worlds, sir? How many species have they eliminated this way? 47 confirmed, Kyung-ho said quietly, including mine.
The silence in the room was deafening.
These officers had served with him for years, but none of them had known the truth about his homeworld. They had been told it was destroyed in a natural disaster, not a deliberate act of genocide. The Throckeri weren't killed by a plague, he continued. The Zephyrians didn't destroy themselves in a civil war. The hegemony killed them all because they fought too hard, cared too much about their freedom. Captain Minho stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the metal floor. Sir, if this is true, then we're not soldiers. We're accessories to mass murder. Before Kyung-ho could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Red lights flashed as the automated systems detected an unauthorized presence in the compound. But instead of the usual sounds of combat, the intruder alert was followed by something unprecedented. A request for parley. Commander, came the voice of the duty officer over the intercom. We have a situation. Human male has somehow penetrated our perimeter. He's carrying a white flag and requesting to speak with you directly. Kung-ho and his officers rushed to the main entrance of the compound. There, standing calmly between two very nervous hegemony guards, was a human male in his 30s. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. His clothes were torn and dirty, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. Commander Kyung-ho, the human said, his voice carrying easily across the compound. My name is Jake Morrison. I represent what's left of the human resistance. How did you get past our sensors? Kyung-ho asked, genuinely curious. Jake smiled. Grimly, your sensors are designed to detect weapons and hostile intentions. I didn't bring any weapons, and I'm not here to fight. I'm here to talk. About what? About the fact that you figured out what your government really is, Jake said simply. About the fact that half your soldiers are already asking questions they never asked before. About the fact that you have a choice to make. Kyung-ho felt a chill run down his spine. How could this human know about the classified orders he had just received? I can see it in your eyes, Jake continued, addressing not just Kyung-ho, but all the hegemony soldiers who had gathered to listen. Now, you came here thinking you were conquering a primitive world. Instead, you found something that scared your masters enough to order our complete extinction. He stepped forward, and remarkably, the guards didn't stop him. Your commanders know what we know, Jake said, his voice carrying across the silent compound. That courage isn't a disease to be cured. It's what separates living from merely existing. It's what makes life worth the pain of living it. Jake looked directly at Kyung-ho. We know about the poisoned ships. We know about the timeline. We know that in 72 hours, every human on this planet will be dead unless someone stops it. How do you know this? Kyung-ho asked. Because we're not the first, Jake replied. Before they poison our world, they have to evacuate all their own people. Some of your soldiers have been talking to us, telling us things, warning us. Kyung-ho looked around at his assembled troops and saw the truth in their faces. They had been sharing intelligence with the humans. His own soldiers had been committing treason, and he found he couldn't blame them. So here's what I'm offering, Jake continued. Help us stop the poison ships, and we'll help you remember who you were before they turned you into weapons. Help us fight for something worth fighting for, and maybe we can all find a way to be human again. The compound fell silent, except for the distant sound of wind blowing through the ruins of the city. Kyung-ho looked at his officers, at his soldiers, at the human who had somehow walked through their defenses to offer them redemption. The penalty for treason against the hegemony is death, Kyung-ho said quietly. The penalty for doing nothing, Jake replied, is living the rest of your life knowing you could have made a difference and chose not to. As the sun set behind the broken skyline of New York, Kyung-ho made the hardest decision of his life. By dawn, more than half of his remaining forces had quietly slipped away from their posts. Taking weapons and equipment with them, they found the human resistance camps hidden in the ruins of the city, where Jake and his followers welcomed them not as enemies, but as allies in a fight that had suddenly become about more than just one world. It had become about the right to choose who they wanted to be. The alarm screamed across the bridge of the rebel flagship. Liberation as massive hegemony reinforcements dropped out of hyperspace. Kyung-ho gripped his command chair, watching the tactical display light up with dozens of enemy contacts. 3 heavy battle cruisers, 8 destroyers, and a swarm of fighter craft that outnumbered his makeshift fleet 10-1. Sir, there. Hailing us reported communications officer Hae-won, who had chosen to follow him into rebellion. Her voice was steady, despite the impossible odds they faced. Put them through. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the hegemony flagship Eternal Order. Admiral Taehyun stood at the center, his scarred face twisted with disgust. Side by side on 6 different worlds. Now they faced each other as enemies. Commando Kunja, Taehyun's voice dripped with contempt, or should I say, former commander. You have been infected by human weakness, contaminated by their disease of independence. Surrender now, and the hegemony may show mercy to your deluded followers. Kyung-ho looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Half were former hegemony soldiers who had chosen conscience over orders. The other half were humans who had learned to operate alien technology in a matter of weeks. Jake Morrison stood at the weapons console, his fingers dancing over controls that should have taken years to master. I've learned something from the humans, Tae-hyung, Kyung-ho replied, his voice carrying across both fleets. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. Then you will find death instead. Taehyun snarled. All ships, engage. Show these traitors the price of defying the hegemony. The space around Earth erupted into chaos. Plasma bolts and quantum torpedoes streaked through the void like deadly fireworks. The first wave of hegemony fighters swept. Down on the rebel fleet, their advanced targeting systems locking onto the smaller vessels, but the rebels fought back with something that the Gemini had never encountered before. Creativity born of desperation. "Jake, execute the Morrison maneuver," Kung Ho ordered. The human resistance leader grinned as he triggered a series of controlled explosions in their own cargo bay. The Liberation suddenly vented atmosphere and debris, making it appear to be mortally wounded. The Gemini fighters swooped in for the kill, only to find themselves flying into a cloud of metallic chaff that scrambled their sensors. Hidden weapons ports opened along the ship's hull, and close-range pulse cannons tore through. The confused enemy fighters. It was a tactic no hegemony commander would have ever attempted. Sacrificing their own ship's integrity for a tactical advantage. "Brilliant," whispered Captain Minho from the tactical station. "They think like prey that's learned to hunt." Battle raged for 3 hours. Rebels used every trick they could think of. They turned cargo containers into guided missiles. They used the gravity well of Earth's moon to slingshot damaged ships back into the fight. When the human vessel Brooklyn's Revenge lost its main engines, its crew manually steered it into a collision course with a hegemony destroyer, singing an old Earth song called Amazing Grace as they flew their ship into the enemy's hull. But courage and creativity could only go so far against overwhelming numbers. One by one, the rebel ships fell. The Freedom's dawn exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Never again drifted lifeless through space. Its hull breached in a dozen places. Converted human freighter Lisa's Hope disappeared in the fireball of a quantum torpedo. On the bridge of the Liberation, damage reports poured in faster than they could be processed. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Main weapons offline. Life support failing. Half the crew dead or wounded. "Sir," Hayone called out, her voice strained. "Admiral Taeyoon is hailing us again." The enemy commander appeared on screen, his face victorious. "Look around you, old friend. Your fleet is broken. Your cause is lost. Surrender now, and I will make your death quick." Kyung Ho looked at the tactical display. 3 rebel ships left, all badly damaged. The massive hegemony poison ships were beginning their atmospheric deployment, preparing to release their deadly cargo into Earth's air. In 12 hours, every human on the planet would begin dying. He thought of Lisa in the detention camp, singing lullabies to orphan children. He thought of Jake walking unarmed into a military compound to offer alliance instead of revenge. Thought of his own soldiers choosing to become something better than they had been. "No," Kung Ho said quietly. Then louder, "No, we won't surrender." Then, "You will die for nothing," Taehyun replied. "Not for nothing," Kyung Ho said, turning to Jake at the weapons console. "For everything." Jake nodded, understanding immediately. His hands flew over the controls, overriding every safety protocol on the ship. The Liberation's quantum core began to overload, building toward a cascade failure that would destroy everything within a 50-mile radius, including the poison ships. "All ships, this is Commander Kung Ho." He broadcast on all frequencies, ramming speed. "Target the atmospheric processors. Make every shot count." The 3 remaining rebel ships accelerated toward the massive poison vessels, their crews singing the same human songs they had learned from their allies. The new dawn struck the first processor ship amidships, its overloading reactor turning both vessels into a miniature star. The second chance crashed into the second processor, her captain screaming defiance until the very end. The Liberation aimed for the largest poison ship, the one carrying enough toxins to kill half of Earth's population. As they closed the distance, Kyung Ho opened a final transmission to the planet below. "This is Commander Kyung Ho to all human settlements," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "The immediate threat is ended, but others will come. The hegemony will not forgive what happened here, what you gave us. This choice to be more than killers. Spread it to the stars. Show them what we learned from you, that some things are worth dying for." The Liberation struck the poison ship at full speed, both vessels disappearing in a flash of light that could be seen from Earth's surface in the aftermath. Admiral Taehyun stared at the debris field in stunned silence. His fleet had won, but at a cost that made victory meaningless. Half his ships were damaged or destroyed. Atmospheric poison was gone. Somehow, the rebellion had spread to other systems during the battle, with hegemony forces defecting. On 3 different worlds, on Earth's surface, humans and alien allies worked together to rebuild what had been destroyed. They buried their dead side by side, human and alien graves marked with the same simple words. They chose to be free. Lisa Park, now leader of the New Earth Council, stood in what had once been Central Park, watching children play among the memorial stones. Human children and young aliens who had been adopted by human families.
Learning
Together, that courage was not something you were born with, but something you chose every day. In the years that followed, the rebellion spread. Across the galaxy like wildfire, the hegemony found itself fighting not just humans, but its own former soldiers, who had learned that orders were not more important than conscience. Species that had been enslaved for centuries began to remember what freedom felt like. The war was far from over, but something had changed in the galaxy, something that could never be undone. The idea that ordinary beings could choose to be extraordinary, that courage was contagious, that sometimes the greatest victory came from being willing to lose everything. For what was right, Kyung-ho had been wrong about one thing. They hadn't lost their souls in trying to destroy humanities. They had found them, and across the stars, that discovery was spreading faster than any fleet, stronger than any weapon, more dangerous to tyrants than any army. Hope, the end.